so we don't run too late. I know many of you met Linda Murphy when she was here two years ago. 2 years ago, on a wonderful media trip, and we are very excited to have her back. A brief word about why we're taking attendance. And I apologize, I know this sounds heavy-handed, but here's here is the evolution of this seminar after Drink Local Wine, when we had 2 different tours coming over here and a big bus tour going around in the Front Range. We heard back from some of the participants that, oh my God, you wouldn't believe what happened at this winery, or what they said, or they weren't ready for it, whatever. And it occurred to us we really haven't done a great job of letting you know what the press expects when we bring the media to your wineries. So that's why we're asking you all to attend this. We're taping it so that if you missed something, you fall asleep, which you won't do, I guarantee, listening to Linda. But if you do fall asleep, you'll be able to go online and watch this again and again, because it is going to be very moving. Linda is one of the most dynamic and exciting people I've ever had the pleasure to meet.
Are you single? I know you're not.
Let me make a call. And what's fascinating to me, okay, good, it's in here. In 1990, Linda Murphy quit her job as a sports writer editor in San Diego, California, and moved to Sonoma County. What I find fascinating is that there's this whole culture in the wine writer industry of former sports writers. And, don't spend a lot of time, but if you could explain that to us, I think it would be fascinating.
We drink a lot better in the wine business than we do as sports writers.
But you really learn how to drink.
You learn how to drink, but you also, when you're on the road and there was an expense account, when you're in Cleveland and you're in your room eating room service, you ordered a bottle of wine. And it lasted longer than if you ordered a glass of scotch.
Okay, all right.
There's more to it than that, and I can talk about that in a second.
The wine bug bit hard during a harvest job with Russian River Valley Pinot Noir producer Mary Edwards. And since then, Linda has progressed from barrel washer to winery public relations director to James Beard award-winning San Francisco Chronicle wine section editor to writer for publications including Decanter, Cooking Light, Food and Wine magazines, and an upcoming
And that's a run-on sentence.
And an upcoming book, which I hope she will talk about, that prominently features several Colorado wineries. Linda, I'm so glad you're back.
I'm thrilled to be here, and it's an honor as well. When I was here 2 summers ago, I had been invited in previous years to visit Colorado on one of Doug's tours, and at the time I was at the San Francisco Chronicle as the wine section editor. We had a wine section every week, 6 to 8 pages devoted to mostly wine with beer and spirits. Unfortunately, with the economy bust, that section no longer exists, but there's still a lot of wine coverage in the newspaper. So the Chronicle had a policy: you cannot travel on somebody else's dime. We had to pay our own way to go. Yet the catch-22 is there was no money in the budget for you to travel. So I said no to Cuvée Act's 3 consecutive years that I simply couldn't go. So once I became a freelance writer, I jumped on the chance to come here again. I like to tell people that I've gone from hack to flack and back. Hack being a sports writer, and most sports writers don't get any credit for being any good as journalists, but I think some of the best journalism in our country comes from sports writers. I got into the PR business in the wine industry just as an entree to learn the business, to learn the ins and outs, to learn about distribution, to learn about production, using my journalism skills. And then as soon as I felt qualified, it took me about 8 years to feel comfortable, I got back into journalism, so I'm a hack again. And just as a side note, when I was the assistant sports editor at the San Diego Union, Bruce Schoenfeld was fresh out of Harvard and had come to our newspaper to be a sports writer. I know a lot of you know Bruce. I think he would agree with me. He was a snot-nosed 23-year-old who thought he knew everything. And it was my job to show him that he did not. He's done pretty well for himself since then, but he's yet another sports person who got into wine writing. And I think it's not just, drinking better. That's just, a funny thing I say. But there's a lot in common. The ability to write, the ability to see something, to hear something, to taste something, and then describe it so that your readers feel like they might have been there, like a good game story from a football game almost would tell you what you need to know as if you were in the stands watching it. And also in sports, you remember statistics. You remember where you were when such and such hit a home run that won the World Series. There's all these markers in sports that you remember, and I think a lot of us, when we get to taste a lot of wine, we have those same markers for a specific wine, a winery, a region, a person, a story we heard. So there's sort of an affinity to remembering these things and cherishing them and bringing them back out at the appropriate time. I'm going to ask you 3 questions. Usually I ask a lot more than that. First of all, does anybody in this room not want publicity for your wine, your winery, or your vines? Does anybody not want that? Good answer. No answer is the right answer. Does anyone here not want free or nearly free advertising for your wine, your winery, your vineyards? Good, we're doing well. Anybody here does not want to have a sustainable business, to increase your profits, to grow your brand, to be in this game for the long haul? Is there anybody in this room that does not want that? Because if you are, you're A, in the wrong seminar, and B, in the wrong business. So much of what happens in the wine industry is generated by the media. And whenever I refer to media, I'm not just talking about wine writers, but also distillery writers, beer, spirits, any kind of adult alcoholic beverage writer. We all pretty much want the same things. I'm also talking about building relationships with people who can then reach such a broader audience. They talked about it a little bit in the last group. Wine writers of traditional publications, newspapers, magazines, online, radio, TV, and now the bloggers. This world of bloggers has a lot of people in the wine business flummoxed across the country. They don't know quite what to do about bloggers. And I'm going to say one thing about that now, and then we can answer questions later. Just as wine writers kind of rise to the top, the cream rises, and you start to figure out who's the most influential, who can do you the most good, who might be enamored by your story when another writer might not. You start to build up your A-list of writers that you would like to have contact with and you hope would write about you. The same thing is happening with bloggers. Anybody can have a blog, but you really have to have something important to say. It has to be accurate. And too many bloggers right now are just throwing whatever is on their head out there. And those folks are kind of going away. They're kind of crawling back in the hole because social media is calling them out on not understanding the industry or not understanding your wine or your vines. So I think bloggers, I'm going to include them in this conversation, but it doesn't mean all bloggers. It means those that are actually showing some skill and some knowledge and an interest in really learning the business if they don't already know it. Now, I know that most of you sell all your wines direct. I think that's probably the case. Maybe a few of you are shipping outside of your state, but that's not a reason not to appeal to the media that's not local to you. Of course, you want to appeal to your local media, radio, TV, newspapers, magazines. You also want to appeal to those in your state, and I suggest that if you've got quality wine that you're really proud of, don't be afraid to approach the national media. You'll never know when someone tastes a wine of yours, hears a story, reads a blog, and the light bulb goes on, like Ray Isle at Food and Wine Magazine is one example. He likes to find the obscure or the under the radar. I mean, all of us as writers, we want to think we've discovered something, that we were the first one to recognize you and your wine and your region. Well, that's kind of the reward we get for saying me first. But there's a lot of that in the industry, and you could be a me first outside of an area that you might, have been covered in the past. So don't think on a long term, think on not just next week, whether you're going to have a story in the paper, but next month, next year, 2 years, 4 years, 5 down the line. You are going to be breeding relationships with people that are going to pay off for you if you've got a good product, if you're honest and straightforward and open to answering questions that sometimes aren't the ones you want to answer. You've got to do it. And as soon as you're authentic and as soon as you're telling the truth, writers are going to put their guard down. They're going to be a lot more fun to hang out with, I guarantee you. Now, there are prima donnas as wine writers, and you probably have met some of them. There are those who are kind of just hangers-on, along for the ride, don't ask a word, and then there's something in between, and I think most of the wine writers that I know are something in between. We want to hear a good story. We want to know every little thing about you, but we're not out to hurt you. We're not out to write negative about you. So a lot of what you do when you're dealing with the media is to guard against the negative. We all want to promote ourselves. We want to talk about our fabulous wines, our tanks, our barrels, our soils, our staff. That's all part of it. But we also want to be honest with questions and understand that you don't want to make a mistake now that could hurt you forever. I've had a few occasions where a winery or a vintner, usually it's the vintner rather than the winemaker if they're not one and the same, who will say something that I know to be totally untrue. But it sounds good, and that's what that person wants me to write. I automatically click off. I'm not interested in that winery, I'm not interested in that person. It's probably not fair, but there's so much good wine in this world, so many fabulous people and great stories, that I'm going to pull those out who I think are pulling my leg. So if there's one thing you take away, be yourselves, be honest, be authentic. You don't have to volunteer every little thing, but ask, be honest, and then the media's pretty much pussycats after that. You've already disarmed us by being disarmingly honest. I know that a lot of winemakers hate dealing with the media. It's not what they signed up for, vintners as well. You want to make wine. You want to go home to your family. You don't want to answer questions. You don't want to stay late till 6 o'clock to deal with the media. You know, it's kind of not your lifestyle, but you really can't afford to not be accommodating to the media. And I just want to point out, there's some folks in this room that on my trip 2 years ago, and then for a recent story I wrote in Vineyard Winery Management magazine, people came from hundreds and hundreds of miles away. Guy Drew came from Cortez to a dinner. Sally Cookson came from Holy Cross, drove a long way from Canyon City to meet with us. I mean, that's the kind of thing that it takes if you were really serious about getting the media's attention. Now, you pick your spots. You don't have to do it every time. You say, you know what, this is somebody that I think needs to know about our wine and our winery. I'm going to make that sacrifice. The folks from Book Cliff and Boulder Creek were more than accommodating on a very difficult story to put together on Colorado's urban wine industry, the folks east of the Rockies who are, you know, filling the need for major market purchases, but making the wines or growing the grapes here. They kind of had to jump through a lot of hoops to put this thing together, and it wasn't just give me information, it was a photo shoot, and it was finding a location and canceling the shoot and rescheduling, and then the air was filled with smoke on the day that we shot. All those things, but they kind of did it with a, I didn't know if they were smiling when it was happening, but they sounded like they were smiling. So that really goes a long way. You have to kind of go that extra yard when you really think that it's important. There's also a feeling with a few vintners in almost every region. And I just finished writing a book on American wine. I don't have the book with me, and this is, you can't see this, but it's on winemaking in all 50 states. It's a celebration of the growth of the wine industry in America, how it was there in the 1970s, or I'm sorry, 1870s through Prohibition, stalled in Prohibition. Some states took longer to regenerate. Some jumped right on the board and hit the ground running. And I had so many people refuse to call. I wrote it with Jancis Robinson, if you know Jancis Robinson. She's brought the project to me. I did the writing, so she was the consultant editor. I was calling wineries all over the country and not getting return phone calls. I wanted them to be in my book. I needed to know what you were growing, when you were founded. Could you please send a label? Do you have any photography? Time after time, people either didn't respond or said, no, we don't have that, or we'll get back to you next week. Well, that doesn't cut it. If you say no or if you say nothing, I'm going to go to the next name on my list and make that call. Next, 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 next. That's how it works with most of the media, newspapers especially. If somebody's got a deadline of Wednesday and they call you on Tuesday and want a photo, you can't wait till Wednesday. You've got to send it Tuesday. And I'll talk in a little bit about what materials you should have in place in anticipation of that sort of a call coming. But you know, the media is very picky about what it wants, and each of us is individual about what we want and don't want. I think I'm pretty easy about most things, and I roll with it. I know some people that I've had a rather unpleasant time traveling with. None of those on our trip, by the way, where you're embarrassed by the behavior of these people and the entitlement that they have and expecting the red carpet to be rolled out. And let's face it, some wineries don't have red carpets. You don't have that sort of a business, that sort of volume. You don't have hospitality departments. You don't have PR directors. You know, a lot of mom and pop here, but you can be genuine and be cordial and be welcoming. And that's pretty much all that you have to be. And from there, you build, and besides being honest. Here are some of the things that happen when wine writers or alcoholic beverage writers visit you. What they expect and what you might want to be prepared for. It's more or less a checklist. Some of this is obviously duh, but then every once in a while a duh goes missed and you can't believe it. First of all, if it's a group, like Doug's group, we're probably going to be late, even if you're the first appointment, because herding 6 cats into a van, and 2 of the cats won't stop for coffee. One says, oh, I left my laptop back in the room with double back, so they're almost always late. Individual people tend to stay on schedule a little bit better, but the group is probably going to be late. Don't hold that against them. It's just sort of the nature of the beast, but try not to be the last appointment. You might be their best dinner. Also, it really helps that if you're the first appointment, like we would see, 3 wineries in a day, depending on where, sometimes 4 where we were located. If you're the first winery and you're running half-hour late, do the courtesy of calling the next winery on your list, and give them a heads up. Even if you're not all that cordial with them normally, as you should be, call them and say, hey, they're running a half-hour late. And if everybody kind of passes it down, at least knowing you're late means, well, the wine needs to go back in the ice and those sorts of things. It's just a common courtesy. We also, when we get off a van, we usually need the facilities. So build in about 10 minutes of time for everybody to relieve themselves and get settled and sit back down and plug in all their equipment. Excuse me. Stick to the duration of your appointment. Then you don't have that domino effect of everybody being late. You kind of have to have a self-governor on you to say, uh-oh, I'm way over, we need to stop now. Here's my card, call me later, I'll be at home tonight. You kind of have to make yourself accessible for whatever you couldn't get covered on the visit, that you can do it more personally, one-on-one, and probably get a better outcome from that secondary chat than you would from a visit by a group. Please don't have us stand open to the public. It gets really awkward if there's a couple of us and we're trying to taste and talk to the winemaker and there's other people there on the bar sidling up, listening in, asking questions, saying, oh, can I try that? Because let's face it, you often taste wine writers on wines that you're not going to taste to the public because they're not for sale, they're not released, there's such small quantity, it's wine club only, whatever the case might be. So you don't need a special room, but try to find a special little space on your property where you can deal with the media privately. And then you have a more open conversation, I think, than you would in a tasting room. And the media feels a little bit more special than just belling up to the bar with consumers who have stopped in your tasting room. Glassware is important, but it's not so important for you to have Riedel or Spiegelau. I mean, that's great if you can afford them. But just get good quality glassware. Make sure that you've got the right shape for red or white. I don't really like glasses with logo wear on them, so sometimes the glass you use in your tasting room, if the logo's too big or if it's in colors, then that kind of affects our evaluation of the wine. And in my mind, I say, gee, you've just kind of put a barrier in front of me to properly evaluating this wine. It might not really be one, but I might say, gee, I wish there weren't purple and green stripes going around this glass. I mean, you might be proud of your logo glass, but we'd rather have a plain glass. But make sure it's good quality, and I'm really easy about if you give me a white glass and a red glass. I mean, I bet some of you have 8 or 10 good stems, and that's probably it. Am I right? I mean, they're expensive. They're what, $15 a glass for the restaurant Riedel? I don't mind rinsing on my whites and then rinsing on my reds. So 2 glasses work for me, but you'll find some writers that want a clean glass for every single wine you're going to taste. If you don't have it, just explain that that's the case and say, we'd be happy to wash your glass between. You know, what's wrong with rinsing with the same color wine? There's nothing wrong with that, but you're going to get some prima donnas who think that they deserve a clean glass. Just deal with it the best you can, but be honest and say, well, we don't have that much glassware, but I'll do whatever I can to accommodate you. This is a personal thing, but I don't ever eat the water crackers that everybody puts on the table or on the counter. All they do is gum up my mouth. It's like putting water to paste. There are other kinds of crackers that like, you know, the water cracker that's like eating a flour wafer. There's semi-savory crackers. Celery works really well. And any kind of bread, as long as it's not seeded or like a dark bread, that's often good as a palate cleanser, and I prefer it to a water cracker. It's just easier for me to get that out of my mouth and taste. But celery is a good one that they use in Australia. This is a real difficult one for a lot of people to understand, but when writers are traveling, we go, are we going to have to see another cellar? Are we going to have to look at more tanks, more barrels? Are we going to have to walk over more hoses? Well, we understand it's your winery, and you love your winery, and you're proud of what you've got, and you want people to see it, but most seasoned wine writers have seen hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them. And we would rather take the time that you would take us to the cellar to either maybe go out into the vineyard and show us where you grow your grapes and what sort of trellising you use, show us the exposure, show us soil changes, those sorts of things that are truly particular to you and your location. We mostly would rather do that than tour your cellar. And we don't want to take away time from tasting and discussion, because if you're keeping your time, as I advised you to, make good use of your time, and maybe touring the cellar isn't the right thing, unless you've got some amazing new piece of equipment, like a basket press that flies, you know, something like that. We wouldn't mind seeing that. And some of them do kind of look like Star Wars these days. We could see that, but, you know, focus your time, and I don't think the cellar's the place for you to do it. Barrel tastings are another thing that I get asked about a lot. Some media like to taste your future wines. I don't particularly, because I write about wines that are available. I try to write for consumers, and they don't want to buy something that's 2 years away from being released. But if it's instructive, like let's say you've got your first Tempranillo ever in a barrel, I might want to taste that. And not only do I want to taste it, but then that draws us into a conversation about Tempranillo and how you think Tempranillo might be good for your region, for your soils, for your property. So it's more of a tool to lead to where you're going than it is for me to assess that wine in the barrel. Plus, it's too young to assess anyway. I kind of have a pet peeve about Wine Spectator and some of these other magazines that taste wine out of barrel, you know, 1 year in barrel, and it's 2 years away from being released. I just think it's hugely unfair to the wine to give it a number then, and sometimes that number stays with that wine, whether the wine changes or not. Because once a powerful reviewer like Jim Laube in California, anybody from Robert Parker, once they put that 92 number on a barrel, they're not going to later say it was an 88. They're not going to later say it was a 96, because it means they weren't very good at it the first time they tasted it. So they tend to stick around that number, and I think a lot of wineries get hurt by that, prejudging a wine before it's time. So be careful when you do show barrel samples to some people. If you're not really happy with it at that moment, I wouldn't show it at all, except to bring up a point of discussion. Do you have a law here about the amount of pour you can put in a glass for sampling in your tasting room?
Not in a winery.
Okay, in California it's 1 ounce. It's a 1 ounce pour, and a lot of glasses actually have that ounce marked so that their staff doesn't make a mistake, because the ABC there can bust you for over pouring in a tasting room. And so a lot of people keep that same rule with wine writers, but 1 ounce really isn't enough for wine writers. We taste it several times, we swirl, we look at it, we might go back to it again. So be maybe a little more generous with your pour to the media when they visit than you might to somebody in your tasting room who's tasting a lot of wines and moving on, and you don't want to be responsible for them wrapping themselves around a telephone pole out wine tasting. This is kind of one of the no-brainers, but it happens all the time. Whoever is serving the media the wine, please don't wear fragrance. We had this discussion last night at our casual dinner, and there was somebody at the dinner that had some very strong fragrance on. And I wasn't formally evaluating wine, but I was very aware of it, so please tell your staff, no fragrance whatsoever if you're going to be serving the media, because that's one thing that some of us will pick on you for. Even if it really didn't affect them at all, or just a little bit, they're still going to talk about it. So it's one of those traps. Do you feed the winery when they visit? In California, especially in Napa, Sonoma, Paso Robles, the more evolved wine industries, and let's face it, where there's big producers that have lots of money, they want you to visit the winery, but they really want to take you to a restaurant for lunch or dinner. So you taste the wines and then you have them with food, because isn't that what wine is truly for, to enjoy with food? So what better way to have an experience than to taste it with food? But not everybody's budget accommodates that. You might not be able to entertain for lunch or dinner, but a simple picnic lunch is always appreciated. Maybe it's just a cheese tray and some fruit and some quince paste, or some little thing to tide over the hunger that kind of comes up, and the wine gets you salivating, and then you want to have something to eat. So to have a little something is good. If your budget restricts you from even that, try to avoid appointments around meal times. You don't really want to have somebody come at 11 and then have it become noon or noon 30, and they're wondering, are they going to take me to lunch? And you're wondering, when is he going to leave? I mean, so try to pick appointments that don't put you in that jam of, are you going to feed folks? Because it is pretty common in the industry to feed writers when they visit. 9 o'clock's a good appointment. Although they might want coffee too, you never know about that. Do any of you travel on the road to promote your wine and see media along the way? Or should we just stick to when they come to your property? You probably don't have enough to do a lot of road trips, but there's some pointers I have for people that are working markets. So you're with your sales rep, you know, hundreds of miles from where your winery. Try to jam in a media appointment or two. The salespeople are going to fight you on it, but they also know it's a good thing. So if you make several calls in the morning, perhaps have lunch with the local wine writer, the newspaper wine columnist, or the magazine writer for that region, and show them the wines and build that into your sales call. I think that's always really effective. You don't have to show them everything. Show them 3 or 4 of your top wines, your newest wines, whatever ones you're most excited about, and then you have a chance at getting some publicity while you're traveling. There's several things that are small and sound nitpicky, but they're kind of little red flags when the media visits. One of them is not having a winemaker or a vintner or the grape grower host the visit. Those are usually the people who are expected to talk to the media because you are the experts. You've not learned the story. You are the story. You've created the story. You have the technical, the historical, the goals and intentions of your brand in your head because they're yours or they're shared with others. And so if a person who's in a hospitality or a PR role is the one to greet the media, our hearts sink sometimes. That person might be phenomenal. That person might even be better than you at speaking to people and presenting your points. But we feel like, well, where's the person who's responsible for all this? So at least a peer, if you can, or somebody of a winery principal, and shake hands, say hello, thank us for coming, and then you can always say, I'm going to turn it over to our hospitality director, who's been with us for 15 years and knows more about this place than I do. At least then we feel that you cared enough to come say hello to us, because we've cared enough to come visit your winery. Small thing, but it can go a long way. I mentioned not fudging facts. Sometimes you're not really lying, but you're not really telling the truth, so just don't fudge it because we like to find fudges and sometimes we like to expose them. I don't myself particularly, sometimes, but a lot of people are looking for trouble, so don't give them any reason to find it. I edit a copy for Vineyard Winery Management magazine, and almost all of our columnists at some point in the last year have emphasized storytelling. That telling stories, developing personal relationships, and this works with the trade as well, I'm sure you know, that is as important, if not more so, than the wine that's in the bottle. Unless you're not making competent wine. And by competent, I mean no flaws, they're balanced. You know, if your wine is perfectly drinkable, then your story is going to be more important than anything that's in the glass. Now, if you're in Napa Valley and you've got a $200, $300 bottle of Cabernet, it better be damn good. But you're not in that situation. You could make a wine that good, but we all don't expect it to be damn good because not all wines can be. In Napa, that's holy grail stuff. That's crazy stuff to me, in fact. So you want to be yourself, you want to tell your story. And the story isn't necessarily, we're a family-owned winery. We handcraft all of our wines with passion and attention to detail. Well, very few people don't do those things. Very few people, especially at smaller wineries, aren't those things. So that does not make you special. That does not make you unique. You're just like everybody else. So you have to keep honing down to maybe, let's say you're in a rock band. That's what you do at night. Let's say you act in the local theater. Let's say you've climbed Mount Everest. Maybe your children are doing something really exciting. Maybe you studied outside of your region in winemaking or grape growing, whether it be Europe or California or New York or anywhere. Something that adds this layer of complexity to your story, just as you want to add layers of complexity to your wine. We love winery dogs, we love winery cats, we love the occasional winery goat, as long as they don't jump all over us. That's okay. Let your dog bound out of the tasting room come greet us. That's real. It's so simple, but some people chain up the dog and they clean themselves up real good and they stick to the script, and there's nothing that we can get from that. You're in a perfect position to say, we're in Colorado, this is what we do, this is what we believe in, this is who we are, and then good things are going to happen. You all have specific things, special things that somebody else in the room may not have. Try to find what those are. And often it takes somebody outside of your business, outside of your winery, to tell you what they are. It's like you're so used to who you are that you don't think some of these things are special. Run it by somebody else. Run it by other vintners who are friends of yours. I don't think any of you probably have in-place PR directors, do you? You are your own PR director, okay? Well, some wineries that have PR directors, the PR director's job is to pull that story out, because they're from the outside and they ask all the right questions, they bring your story out. Some of them at the big companies are hired to invent stories, which rarely fly, but so really look inside yourself and say, what does make me different from that winery and that winery and that winery? And don't get caught in that trap of trying to be just like everybody else as a way to self-esteem and impressing people. Be who you are, and that goes a long way. When writers come, it's really helpful, if possible, to research them in advance. You want to know who they are, especially if it's like a group tour. I mean, if a writer comes and calls you and says, I want to visit your winery, you know that writer. But if Doug says we're having 5, 6 people come, here's who they are, and you might even give bios and things to people. But go online and read what they've written. See what interests them and what doesn't. And here's a perfect example. Do any of you know Dan Berger? I know you do, yeah. Dan is a long time, he's one of the denizens of California wine writing, was with the LA Times for years and years and years, has been to Colorado a couple times, run several competitions, and he still does quite a bit of writing. He has gotten to a point where he dislikes Chardonnay very, very much, especially if it's oaky and buttery, and a lot of us are kind of in that boat. So you don't want to show Dan Berger an oaky, buttery Chardonnay. You kind of know, don't go there. He also likes high acidity, low pH, because he's always looking to see whether your wine's going to age or not, because to him, it can't be very good wine if it's not going to be age-worthy. I think that's a little too anal and a little too drilled down, but that's Dan. So you don't want to show him a wine that's, 3.85 pH, because he will say to your face, wow, that'll never age. And you've just lost him. So try not to show someone like that who has very particular desires and likes and dislikes, because a lot of us, you could see online what we like and dislike. So just steer clear of that negative. Press kits. Those are those lovely folders with your bio and all the text sheets for all the wines and your history and all that sort of thing. I love press kits. I also dissect them in my room at the end of each night and leave behind all the things I don't want to carry around, and I only keep with me what I like. So I really like all of your information on USB drive. Fits in my pocket, fits in my purse, goes through the scanner at the airport when I go back home. So just take your documents, put them on a drive, hand it to the writer, and then we've got everything we need. Now, personally, I like to have your text sheet with all your statistics on it and barreling and all that. I like to have it in front of me when I taste with you, because I'm reading along and you're talking about your wine. That gives me some more questions to ask you that you might not think to talk about. It also saves you from answering a lot of questions like what's the pH and what's the acidity and how long was it in barrel. If it's right there, not only do I have it, and you're giving it to me the way you want me to have it, rather than going off the top of your head, and then when I go home, I have the real story here. So think about having those sheets at the tasting when the writer arrives, because a lot of times we get the press kit on our way out, and I was
going to say, have a trade page and put all that on the website.
Well, that's my next thing, and working for this book really underscored that. It's so helpful if you have a web page, a website that has all of that information on it, and please don't rely on Facebook to talk to the media. Facebook shouldn't be for talking to the media because you're talking to the media in a much different way than you talk to consumers. So a lot of wineries only had a Facebook page for me, so not only was there no image really that I could look at or download or deal with, I didn't really get the winery story. I didn't get your history. I don't know when you were founded. I don't know what grapes you grow. We're having our wine club party next Saturday. Call here so consider please having a website and a Facebook page. And on that website, and this really isn't very hard to do, have a trade page. And you can hide the little trade button way down in the right-hand corner so the consumers won't see it. The trade looks for it, the press looks for it. You should have the information as you want us to have it. The real deal with dates, your history. We want tech sheets on all your current releases. The suggested retail price should be on a page that you hand to me or on a universal drive, because it's very important that we know the price of the wine. You don't really want that on your trade page, though, because as you know, salespeople don't want to have your winery price on it when they're calling on accounts. They're going to work that price themselves. But have all the information so it's downloadable. If possible, have your labels downloadable. Have a couple really great images of your property, your view, your principles. Doing this book, all 50 states are included, so you can imagine the trouble we had getting images and labels for all of them. Some people didn't have them, but if they'd put them on a downloadable page, my job would have been a lot easier, but a lot of really deserving people would have gotten their label in the book that didn't otherwise because we didn't have any way to get it. Now, the traditional press still needs high-resolution images. Most images shot for websites are 72 dots per inch. That's a very low resolution, a very small file size in megabytes or kilobytes, so that when it's downloaded on the page, when it's on the page, it loads quickly. The higher resolution, the bigger the image, the longer it takes a page to load. So you want to have the lowest resolution on your website that consumers are seeing. But on that trade button, when you click to that, you should have some high resolution images. A lot of wineries don't understand this, especially those who are younger and don't even know what a high-resolution image is. It's 4-color, it's 300 dots per inch or higher, but 300 is pretty much the standard. And you want an image, especially if it's going in a book, you want an image that's at least 1 megabyte file size. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, those are great, and any publication can use it. But if you don't have it that high, they can't use it. It just doesn't work for them from a reduction standpoint. You've got to go down the list and call the next person. So a trade page, I can't emphasize this strongly enough. It doesn't have to be fancy. It doesn't even have to be material that you don't already have. It's just making it available to the media. Now, the one thing about having high-resolution images is you can't always capture really good ones on your cell phone or on your little digital phone. Sometimes you do need a photographer with a pretty good camera, and it can be expensive. But consider maybe trading wine or some sort of barter system or something to get somebody who understands light and can do the proper lighting if you want to shoot indoors. If you've got a great-looking tasting room, you need some lighting set up to get full advantage for a high-resolution requirement. So consider finding somebody who can take a good picture that you might not be able to take with your own staff. Did that cover it pretty much for you? Okay, good. Excuse me, when to complain. Writer comes out, you spend a lot of time with them and you think you've been very clear in telling your story, and then when it comes out, you're not happy. Either it doesn't present you in the way you'd hoped to be presented or expected to be presented, or maybe there's some errors, maybe there's some misspelled names, maybe there's some dates that are incorrect. This is always difficult for wineries to know when to complain and when to just shut up, because sometimes when you complain, it only gets worse. You are magnifying the attention. Chances are readers didn't notice the mistake in the first place. You might have been the only one that did. So when you go to a writer, you might at best generate a correction, and the correction, unless it's online, doesn't run with your story again. It goes in a little box on another day, so most readers don't even connect the correction to the story they read a week previously. Now, online, you can correct it right there and republish. But if it's a small thing, I suggest that you talk to the writer very pleasantly and say, thank you so much for the story, I really appreciate it, but for the future, you might want to know that we were founded in 1996 and not 1986. Or our winemaker's name was misspelled, we understand it happens. Be very nice about it, but you still do want to tell the writer that he or she made the mistake, because it will compound, they'll keep making the mistake unless you point it out. But don't scream, don't ask for a retraction, don't demand a correction, because it will likely blow up in your face and then the world will know about it. Now, if there is an egregious error, if there's something that really sullies your reputation or is so inaccurate, untrue, that your reputation is at stake, then you do need to take stronger action. In California, it's pretty easy to deal with these things because almost everybody has a lawyer. Everybody's got somebody in the company who deals with such things. I hope to God you're not that category. I wouldn't be here if you were. But you might want to see legal counsel if it's something that is damaging to your brand. Just be very careful how you approach the writer about the problem and see if you can resolve it without much difficulty. Never go over the writer's head with that sort of thing. The chain of command is always to go to the writer first. It's a courtesy, because if the writer knows you've gone over his or her head, now they're really mad at you and you're screwed. I mean, it can be that vindictive with some people. I don't mean to scare you about the media, because most of us are really pretty nice. But all it takes is a couple a year to behave badly. And you've lost them. They tend to, it usually is the more important they are, the worse behaved they are. So I just caution you about flying off the handle. Put it away, sleep on it, talk to your people. Do we need to correct it? If so, how are we going to go about doing it in a professional, calm way? And if it's really egregious, we might want to bring in some outside help to deal with this. Does that make sense? God forbid it happens to you, but it does happen. We're all human, and newspapers and magazines don't have fact checkers anymore. Very few have copy editors anymore. Used to have people checking all those facts. A copy editor might call you and say, is this how you spell your name, Steve? And is this when you started work here? Those people don't really exist except at some of the top flight magazines like Food and Wine and National Geographic. Those people aren't there anymore. So, yeah.
I make a point. I used to work for Colorado State University, and I was having articles in the paper every week or so. And then one of the other agents in the office went down to the newspaper and filed a complaint because she wasn't getting anything in the paper. So that
Okay.
meant that for about
Yeah.
6 months, I couldn't get anything in the paper.
Right. So you experienced that firsthand.
Right. So if there's any other staff members that feel they have been slighted by the writer, they should not contact the writer. They should have the owner.
Right, right,
contact
right.
the writer.
Exactly.
Because otherwise it causes the same problem.
I've seen many times in California tasting rooms, I don't mean to compare to California, but that's where I live and that's where most of my experience is, where tasting room personnel have said the wrong thing to a writer, chastised or called out or whatever, and this person shouldn't be in that position, should know enough to take themselves out of that position and pass it on to somebody else. Yeah, but if you're the winery principal, you usually hear about that later and not at the time that it happens. So maybe a little staff training is called for, that if someone walks in and says they're a wine writer, if you're not confident dealing with it, you might want to call a manager or the winemaker, or somebody else to maybe deal with that and decide what level. Now, if a wine writer just stops in and says they're a wine writer and they want to taste your wine, that's a little suspicious. Maybe not here. Maybe it's okay to just drop in, but where I'm from, it's not, because the person that just drops in is likely not one that you want to spend your time with. This is somebody that doesn't know how it works, hasn't called ahead, or even if they call an hour ahead, say, hey, I'm in your area, is it possible for me to visit? That's what they do. They don't just stop in, because there's a lot of frauds that go around saying they're wine writers or bloggers trying to get a free tasting and free wine. So you don't want your precious time, sucked up by people like that. So I think most of the legitimate ones will let you know they're coming, even if it's 15 minutes in advance.
We should probably take a few
Yep.
more questions if I can, or give you a few more minutes either way.
Oh, questions, I'm done.
Real quickly, how long is the ideal visit? And obviously that's going to differ from a winery like Coppola to a tiny winery here, but you know, what's too long and what's not long enough?
I think an hour and a half is perfect.
Okay.
Especially when you build in that little bit of, we need to use the facilities, I need to check my emails. All of us are always on our emails, our iPads, our laptops now. Very few of us can just go on a trip for 3 or 4 days and not be plugged in because we all have our own businesses and things. So there's a little bit of time required for that, and smart tour operators build in that time, you know, at the end of a day so we can catch up with our emails. But I think an hour and a half is perfect. Try not to pour too many wines. Try to find out what you really want that writer to taste. Please don't bring out 20 wines. You'll be there forever. And after a while, they start to get lost on you. We want you to jury what you show us. But I think an hour and a half. After that, it's pretty long. And it doesn't have to, don't make it last an hour and a half. You can kind of tell when the media's done. We put down our pen, close our press kit, push back.
If a writer asks about a particular wine or subject or
Yeah.
that the winemaker owner is uncomfortable with,
Or doesn't know the answer.
well, I'm thinking, you know, you come and visit a winery, say, I've read about your Tempranillo, I'd really like to taste it. Well, this year's Tempranillo is really terrible, I don't want to show it to you. I mean, is it an honest answer? Is it that's not ready to show yet? How do you, you know, if the winery's uncomfortable fulfilling the writer's request, how do you work around it?
I want the honest answer. Now, you don't have to say it's terrible, but you can say, we're not, you know, it didn't meet our expectations. I can show you one from 2 years ago that's pretty much what we're going for. I would work around it, but be honest. And if the writer really has a good palate and you show a Tempranillo that's not the one you want them to show, that's the one they're going to know, and that's the one they're going to remember. So either give them a previous vintage, or then maybe you say, this last vintage was really difficult for us. We had frost, we had drought. Explain why it didn't meet your expectation, but would you like to taste a barrel sample of the next vintage? That's really where a barrel sample would come in very handy. And you might even have it already pulled in case that comes up. You could say it's not ready to show, but then you'll get the answer, well, we still want to taste it. Anybody else questions? I hope I haven't been too negative, but I'm just being really down to earth. This is how it works. Yep.
I appreciate your comment with regard to the importance of being honest and authentic and transparent. In your years of experience, beyond the promotional end of the media relationship that you've addressed, would you speak to situations where there has actually been a crisis, and a winery is in crisis management mode, and by virtue of the fact that they had positive relationships with the media over the years, they were able to call in some of those relationships in order to help mitigate the crisis that they were faced with?
Well, in general, if you have a solid relationship with a writer, oftentimes that writer will ignore your crisis, will choose not to write about it. They're doing you a favor that way. But if it's a crisis that can't be ignored, even then a good relationship, or at least knowing this person and having a conversation between the two of you might mitigate the level of the damage. But here's one example. Hansel Vineyards is a very famous winery in Sonoma Valley, one of the first wineries in California, one of the first to do barrel-aged Chardonnay. About 15 years ago, they were called out by Wine Spectator magazine for having TCA in their wines. And the Spectator wrote about it and kind of hung Hansel out to dry. Well, the owner's wife, who's been in PR forever and ever and ever, took immediate action, confessed that their cellar was tainted. This 100-year-old cellar was tainted, and they knew it. They were already taking measures to clean up the cellar, and then invited any of the media to come to that winery and look at that cellar and see where the TCA came from. It was in all the drains. All the cleaning solvent with the cork had gone right into the drains and it spread throughout. They said, yes, this happened. We're trying to mitigate it. Come. We'll show you where it happened and how it happened and what we're doing about it. Well, they ended up building a whole new winery. They abandoned the old historic. You can still see it and visit it, but it's not used for winemaking anymore. That was so proactive, saying, yep, it happened, and here's what we're doing about it. Now, there was a very similar case about the same time where BV Winery, Boileau Vineyard, was called out by Jim Laube for having TCA in its wines. And Jim Laube sent the wines that he thought had TCA, or sampling wines, to ETS Lab. I think Gordon's here tomorrow. Sent it to the lab. They had it tested. They had all the parts per trillion, and they ran with that. They met with the people at BV, and there was all of this hemming and hawing, and it's really not that bad. Our customers haven't complained. We're not hearing anybody return the bottles. It can't be that bad, or it's just enough that, you know, most people can't detect it. They tried to soft sell it so much, yet the numbers were there. And later they finally said, well, yeah, we kind of goofed. We knew that one cellar had some issues with its ventilation system. They didn't attack it head on, and they got nailed for it, and they had 10 years of sales difficulty because of that. And I don't think they've fully recovered since. So, I mean, that's just two examples that I know.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Can you give us any suggestions for when you have a group of winemakers come and there is a prima donna that is difficult, making that experience good for the other five?
Well, the other five are probably just laughing at the prima donna. They're laughing inside going, get a load of him, or her, or her. There's a tendency to want to
Spend all your time on it.
yeah, and if that's the most important person in the room, and if that's somebody that you've been wanting to come visit your wife for a long time, you kind of have to feed that person, but chances are the others will be just fine and they'll know exactly what situation you're in. Now, if there's two prima donnas, that's a problem. Flip a coin. I mean, there really aren't that many that stick out like sore thumbs that way, but they're there. And I suspect that the largest grouping of them are in California. Anyone else?
What should a winery do after the writers have left?
Oh, follow up. Sit down, gather everybody together. How'd you think that went? Oh, let me say, I know we're running a little late, but one thing, some writers...
Just retailers would come away involved.
It's only the people that sell their wines.
Yeah, right.
No problem. Some writers will tell you very openly and without invitation what they think of your wines. And you really want some feedback, I think. I mean, most winemakers want positive feedback, but they also want to hear the negative too. And if every writer is saying, you know what, these wines are way too oaky, then you go, well, we should probably rethink that, or let's talk about it. Some writers won't say a word. They won't give you anything until you read what they've written. So you're going to have both those cases. Chatty Cathy like me, and then somebody that's not going to say a word. But afterward, you should sit down and ask each person's opinion who participated. Even the tasting person who might have greeted them when they walked in. How did it go? What could we have done differently? And it's second nature to wonder how that's going to go. And one good thing you can do is, as the media is leaving, make sure you give them a card and make sure you say, please call me if you have any questions. Now, I know that some folks don't want to be called. They don't want to invest the time. They don't even want to deal with the media at all. They'd rather be golfing. They'd rather have a root canal than see the media. But make sure that you leave yourself open to those people if they have. Some writers don't want to ask a question in front of other writers. They'd rather ask it privately. Because A, they don't want the other writers to get a good question and get good answers, or they also might be a little overwhelmed or not feeling confident enough to ask. Make sure you say, call me, email me anytime. I'd be happy to fill in any gaps. And then you might also reach out to them after they visited and said, we really appreciated it. I'd love to hear your comments should you care to share them. My door's always open. Let's keep talking. But it usually goes worse than you think it did. No, I'm joking. I'm joking. No, actually, it usually goes much better than you think it will.
Well, thank you very much.
Sure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.